Yeah, it is. I was meant to do the show last year, and we were coming to Melbourne, and then the festival got cancelled because of COVID, obviously. So that was a bit disappointing and very, very expensive. So we this year we weren't even sure if we were going to travel. We didn't know if we could come here until 2 weeks before the show was due to start. Um, we were still, Auckland was going in and out of lockdown, and Australia was deciding if it was an orange zone or a red zone or a green zone, and I was doing my very best to just stay out of Auckland where I live, to in case it went into lockdown again. So we booked a little theatre here this time around, and we decided we'd just do a little show here in Fitzroy at a cool little space. But it's just been great being here and doing the show and getting out and doing the lineups and doing meeting comics. I'm on a lot of lineups here. I'm doing the Comics Lounge again tonight, which is a great venue, one of the best venues I've ever played, and doing the All Around the World show again tonight, which is a really good show if you get the chance to catch it during the festival. Normally 2 or 3 comedians from around the world. It'll be me and a Canadian guy and a Singaporean guy. Look, I think every time we've performed the show, people have enjoyed it, and that's been really fun. The show, when I was originally going to bring it to Melbourne, I was going to be doing it for the first time here. I was going to debut the show in Melbourne, and then because we didn't do the festival last year, I took the show on tour. I took it around New Zealand. It gave me a chance to refine the jokes a bit. So I think I've been really happy with how people have received it. I think the audiences here seem to get what we're doing. The typically smaller crowds out here in Fitzroy, which is fine though, and it's a nice little intimate theatre. So we're having a great time. The shows. This is a funny thing when you write a show. They'll say to you in September, what is your show about? And you'll say, oh, it's about this, and you'll give it a name, and then you write the show, and it's barely about that at all, but it's I try to talk about my own life, my own upbringing, and trying to feel more conscious of the world around me, and trying to be more. I guess the word is woke nowadays, but just I don't really like the word. Even though it's part of my show title, I think that for me it's about just being more conscious of everybody around you and being a better person. Well, for me, I was raised by a traditional Catholic Italian kind of family. My mum was full Catholic, full Italian, which means she's 1,000% Catholic, and a lot of her views, her worldview was shaped by that. My mum's a lovely, beautiful person, but she was born in 1949, and the world had different values at that point. And to her enormous credit, she's one of the probably few people of her age bracket that I think is trying to become more conscious as well and trying to look at the world in a different light. But when we were kids, she would take us to anti-abortion rallies, and because that was what the Catholic Church said you should do. When we were kids, she was quite homophobic. She was, I don't think she's that person. She's definitely not that person now. But that was sort of the upbringing that I had. And then I went to an all-boys school. Like a very traditional all-boys school in New Zealand, and it was always quite sort of strange. There was kind of this kind of masculine kind of need in that kind of environment where it can be quite homophobic and quite strange. And I think New Zealand to this day struggles with race issues the same way that Australia does. I think we struggle with our acknowledgement of other people's religions, and religious tolerance in the world. We need to be more understanding of people and the myriad of people that make up our species. I don't know if I was, if old Jamie values was far off what I am today. I've always tried to, be a good person and conscious of the people around me, But you know, you live in this world today where like, you know, it's one thing about this culture is, I think everybody's trying to prove how conscious they are rather than actually do it.
Virtue signaling.
Yeah. That's a term that gets put to it, and I'm not a huge fan of the term, but I guess people are, rather than actually trying to be a better person and trying to be an advocate for your friends and trying to be an ally for your friends, so whether they're a racial minority or whether they're part of the LGBTQ community, or whether they find things harder because they're female or because they're trans or whatever. You know, I try to be, I guess, as much of an ally as I can be. I like, you know, and try to be aware of the disadvantages that being part of those communities sometimes provide you in what is a kind of white patriarchal society. I'm not perfect, like like anybody. So Awokening for me is about realizing that I'm not perfect and maybe trying to be a little bit better. It's neither. It's neither. It's not a good or a bad thing. Comedy is a reflection of society. Comedy is, I don't think we, as performers, tell people what to think, but we do point a finger at the things in society so that they'll start to think about it, so that they'll analyse that thing a little bit more, so they'll think about that part of society a little bit more. You have comedians nowadays who complain and say, oh yeah, I can't get away with these jokes in this town or this room or this place or this suburb because they're so woke, they won't like my jokes. And that's, that is just society reflecting back on you. It's just society. If you're a good comedian, then you will be able to understand how society's moving forward and mirror that in a way. And if there are things you like about it or there are things you don't like about it, you should have a good reason for that. You should be able to point a finger at that. It's what the purpose of my comedy, I would hope, is to make people think about the world a little bit more. And like there are far better comedians in the world who are doing a far better job of that than me. But I try to do that with my comedy, and that's what we're all striving towards. The greatest comedy shows I've ever seen are shows that, for large parts, aren't funny. But we have this idea that comedy has to be if you're going to do an hour, you just have to have laughs all the way through, and that's not necessarily true. The best comedy shows I've ever seen are introspective and vulnerable and interesting. And there's some fantastic shows in this festival that are doing that, and people around the world who have done a much better job of that than me. Maybe I'm too embedded in the joke still, but I think there's a war between the audience and the comedian to a degree, where the audience wants to be entertained. They're paying to be entertained. They're paying for an entertainer. The audience believes you're an entertainer, and you as a comedian maybe believe you're an artist. And you want to create art, and you want to say something interesting, and the truth is probably somewhere in the middle, where you're both an entertainer and an artist, and finding that sweet spot where the audience can enjoy it, and then you can also say something that's interesting and creative and introspective that maybe changes people's opinions. That's the ultimate goal of comedy. Okay. But if you come see my show, it's mostly just jokes. I'm not very good. Well, that's the egotism, isn't it? It's the need to be seen. I remember the first time I did comedy, I went to an information session, an information evening for people who wanted to try to do comedy, and it was at the Classic Comedy Club in Auckland, which, if you're ever in Auckland, it's one of the best comedy clubs in the world. And Scott Blanks, who runs the place, somebody I've got an enormous amount of respect for. And I remember him saying he was giving this sort of talk to people who had thought about maybe I want to try stand-up comedy, and it wasn't really like how to do comedy or anything. It was just sort of the process of what it is to be a comedian. And it was a couple of hours he talked about what it is to be a comedian, and there was something he said in there where he said, if you're a comic, this is different to being an actor. It's different to being a director. You if you're a comedian, you are the performer, but you're also the writer, and you're also the director, and you're also the stagehand, and you're also the producer, and you are the marketer, and it's all you. What we do, I guess, and I mean I can't speak for every comedian because there's a myriad of different genre in what we do, but for observational comics, it is to an extent you. It's your ideas, it's your thoughts, it's your observations on the world. So it's a piece of you that's out there. It's a performance of you. It's somebody asked me once, do you play a character on stage? And I said, no, I play a character in the rest of the world. Lenny Bruce, because he changed what comedy is, and a lot of comedians don't like Lenny Bruce nowadays because they say, I watched the Lenny Bruce thing the other day and it wasn't that funny. But he changed what comedy was. He changed everything. Dave Chappelle, I think, is the greatest comedian in the world right now. He's hilarious, and he's also introspective and interesting and creative. And the third one would probably be Eddie Izzard, I think, is one of my favourites. I always rate Eddie Izzard because there's something that he does that's surreal and different. That he has these topics, these observations that are not things that you would make in normal everyday life. I love Richard Pryor, yeah.
Jamie Patterson, do you believe in a comedy god?
Is there a I don't know. I don't know. None of us have the answer to what's stringing everything together in the universe, but sometimes kind of things just happen in a show that are hilarious, and that's a moment, that's a gift from the world to you, whether that's a god or an omnipotent force of some sort, I don't know, or maybe it's just the dumb luck of being on stage sometimes, and sometimes things are going to happen. Oh yes, 100%. Yeah, no, people, like, if you're a straight man, I think probably the most attractive quality you can have is be funny. Like I'm a below average looking man, but fortunately for me, I'm very funny, so at least as far as the average person goes. Yeah, everything. I love comedy. I love this more than I love anything, and my marriage fell apart about a year and a half ago, and that was an incredibly difficult time for me, and it was because this life that we live, it's very difficult to have a relationship. You're on the road, you're always around, you're out late at night. My wife was a lovely human being, but she her interests are different to mine. She wants to be at home, and cooking dinner and going to bed at 9 o'clock at night, and I'm maybe 2 hours away from walking on stage. It's you see these people in the news, who have show business kind of relationships where they break up, they have 5 or 7 marriages, and you go, what's wrong with these people? Why can't they keep a relationship together? And then you get into show business and you go, oh, that's why. Have you ever read Malcolm Gladwell? Malcolm Gladwell, a brilliant sociologist and author, he would have you believe that talent doesn't exist. And I don't know if I agree with him 100%, but to a degree, he says talent is the willingness and opportunity to do something more than everybody else is willing to do it, and to practice at that thing more than everybody else is willing to practice at it. And I think if you love something like comedy, like the greatest comedians I know would never stop talking about comedy. They're just always talking about comedy. I know people have been doing comedy for 25 years, 30 years, and they're still talking about comedy, till the early hours of the morning, and they're telling you about some comic that they saw on stage last week, and they're so excited by it because we love it. you know, and if you love something, then you're going to be willing to practice that art form more than anybody else. So that's, yeah, it's I don't think it's an innate skill. I don't know if innate skill at anything really exists, but there's a love for it that I don't know where that comes from, whether it's nature or nurture, and that love is what creates a talent for it. Yeah, well, I mean, for us this year, it's been obviously a lot cheaper, and that's why we've come here to this this little theatre in Fitzroy. You know, it's only like a tiny little boutique room, and it's not in the central hub. You know, last year, having the festival cancelled probably cost me $6,000 or $7,000. You know, in terms of marketing and accommodation and all these kind of things that you pay for, there's the different peripherals to putting on a show. You know, the costs aren't really the you know, just the theatre hire. You know, there's so many other things that go into it. So it can be really expensive. It can be very, very expensive. This year it's cost us very little because we've come here and done it on the cheap. Mostly full time. Yeah, I freelance as a writer, so I used to work in advertising for a long time as a copywriter in advertising, so I still do that. Then I'll get little bits of work here and there where people will send me little bits of work, but most of the time I'm on the road doing comedy. Yeah, well, I probably became a full-time comic about a year and a half ago. That's probably as long as I've been doing it as a full-time comic, but around sort of maybe September, October 2019. And COVID's been an interesting time, but in New Zealand we're fortunate to have a great Prime Minister who kept us out in the world. So we, I was in advertising for about 10 years, and then I became a comic. Yeah, Australians will let you get away with more. You know, Australians, you know, people complain about this city, saying, you know, I was talking before about how people complain about people like certain places being too woke, and you hear these comics coming from Brisbane or Perth going, oh, I hate playing in Melbourne because Melbourne's too woke. You know, and I think Melbourne's a step behind most of New Zealand. You know, I think you can get away with more. I think New Zealand audiences as well, especially in Auckland, because there's so much comedy in Auckland. New Zealand audiences are almost more comedy savvy. Like, you have to be a really good comic in Auckland if you're going to play the big rooms. You have to really think about your comedy. It has to be really, really well driven kind of comedy. Whereas here, I think people are less. And, you know, outside of the festival, the enormous population of people here means that you just don't see comedy as much. No.
Why do you say that?
No, it's the human race will always have a sense of humour. It's you know, emotion and laughter is a huge part of what makes us human. You know, we wouldn't be human beings if we didn't have that. You know, we're just laughing at different things now. You know, it's evolved. The art form has evolved, and it will continue to evolve. Not really. No.
You're one of those comics who can just walk on?
Yeah.
Okay.
I might occasionally look at my set list, but
okay.
Yeah, no, I mostly just walk off stage. Well, I lived in Christchurch for a long time, so like I knew a lot of people, and like I drove past those mosques every day. You know, and my barber, who I used to go to, used to talk about how he was going to bring his family over from Jordan, was shot in the mosque. He fortunately didn't die, but he was shot in the mosque, and I remember seeing him on the news. And I was a few years out of Christchurch at that point, but I remember seeing him on the news and thinking, oh my God, that's the guy who used to cut my hair every month. And so we put on this big charity show called Stand Up for Peace. This is something about comedy, you know, and I don't know if you want this, but it's just, this was an interesting story. When that happened in Christchurch, I was really shocked by it, because I lived there for a long time, and it felt like home to me. And when I saw that, I was in Auckland, and I was a long way away, and there was nothing I could do, and I felt really helpless. You know, that this horrible thing was going on in my city. And so I went down to the Classic Comedy Club, where I perform in Auckland, which is my home club, and I got a drink at the bar because I just wanted to see people. I just wanted to see people I knew, comedians, you know. And I walked in into the theatre, and a friend of mine, Paul Douglas, was on stage performing, and he wasn't talking about the mosque shooting. He was talking about his marriage, you know. He was just talking about everyday life, and people were laughing, and that was something that was quite joyous for me. That, like, you know, that's something we can do as comedians. Like, no matter what's going on in the world, we can still go somewhere and make people laugh, you know. So yeah, we put on this big charity show called Stand Up for Peace. We ran shows all across the country, and I ran the Auckland show, and we had a bunch of comedians who donated their time, and we, I think, across the country raised about $30,000 for the mosque appeal, and it was just comedians like taking the time to do what we do to make people laugh, even during this sort of, what was a tragedy in our country. Make people laugh and use that to raise money.